Hi, my name is Alia. I am a poet and mentor that focuses on the subconscious mind and subconscious healing, specifically when it comes to manifesting and creating the reality that you want. Today is kind of a random video, just a spontaneous little YouTube video for anyone out there to kind of air out my laundry, basically, because I'm kind of in the topic that I want to talk about, I'm actually in the thick of it at the moment, and I have been probably for the last year. Well, okay, let's be honest, we're always learning. Everything that we are learning about ourselves stems from childhood, and it's repeated patterns that we're unconscious to and that continue to manifest in our life until we become conscious of them. But I've become super conscious of it in the past year, and so I'm still kind of learning. But I did a lot of journaling the other day, and I just thought, you know what, let me share this journal entry with you and share my thoughts, because it might help someone out there as well who's kind of going through the same thing. So with that said, what I want to talk about first is the concepts of the universe. So I want to talk about the loop and the spiral that we've continuously find ourselves. So I saw it actually online, this thing that said your ego keeps you in a loop, whereas your intuition helps you spiral. And what that essentially means is that if you are in situations that you find you're constantly repeating, you find maybe they're not always the same situation, but the same feelings keep coming back, the same thoughts keep coming back, you have the same responses and the same fear reactions and those kinds of things. You have the same fears to whichever situation. It might look different, but the fears are the same. That is essentially you repeating your patterns, because what you haven't done at that point is learn from your limiting beliefs, learn from your belief systems to understand what isn't serving me anymore. And because you haven't learned from that, you keep repeating the same situations over and over again in different forms. And so what the intuition does is it allows you to, if you start to pay attention to your limiting beliefs and you start to do the self-reflection and the self-work, to understand yourself and what you're repeating in your life, you start to notice the patterns. And when you start to notice the patterns, you can start to break the patterns. And once you start to break the patterns, you start to spiral. And that's what it is. That's what that kind of life is about learning from your situation so that you can start to, when things show up, start to spiral out of the situation and you start to manifest differently. And basically you're kind of quantum leaping into new realities because you're starting to handle and respond to situations differently. The reason why I'm talking about this is, and the reason why this video is titled What My Mistakes Taught Me About the Self as the Universe, is because it was through my mistakes that I started to realize what I'm repeating and why I'm repeating it. What about my own fear responses and the kind of energy that I'm bringing into my relationship specifically am I allowing myself to be treated, and therefore creating patterns of relationships that continue to manifest in the same. So for me specifically, and I'm not going to talk about too much specifics, but what I want to talk about is my own personal journey when it comes to friendships. So truthfully, I've struggled with abandonment issues like my whole life, and it's one of my deepest limiting beliefs. Attachment issues as well, they kind of go into each other. Within the last, I would say, year, when I started really doing the shadow work, which if you want to know more about shadow work and you want to understand my journey with shadow work, you can find my podcast episode on shadow work to delve deeper into that. But when I did the shadow work, what I started to realize was that my deepest issues were my attachment, and the fact that because I get so anxiously attached, I'm doing that because of my fear of abandonment. I started to realize when I was like 7, I grew up in London, so where I was living previously in London to a new part of London. And when we did that move, my environment completely shifted, because the place I was living before 7 years old, which by the way, take note, 0 to 7. I've discussed this again in my podcast, so find out more information about that, but those are when your core beliefs are formed. So obviously at that point I was in an environment where I felt included. It was very inclusive. I saw people who looked like me. I had Muslim friends, I had black friends, I had a lot of different type of friends. I also had white friends. I just had a lot of different type of friends, and so it allowed me to feel quite seen and heard. But then what happened was when I moved to the place I live in when I grew up as a teenager and stuff, that place was totally different. It was predominantly white and very different environment, much more suburban, rural. And I went into school and immediately found myself in situations where I felt like I was having to prove my worth, and I didn't feel included. I felt left out pretty much the whole of primary school. I was always having friendship issues, and that carried on into my secondary school life. I mean, I found a group of friends, but by the time I was 16, that fell apart. That left me with severe abandonment wounds. And I didn't obviously realize this at the time, but that kept manifesting into my reality. Friendship after friendship after friendship, including up until very recently, continued to manifest like that. And obviously I didn't realize at the time what the reasons for that. I just kind of saw myself as the victim, you know? And so I'm going to talk about what I specifically realized first about myself, and then talk about how it can like apply to your life, and specifically about how mistakes are the sort of stepping stone for you to get closer to your higher self. So for me, what I realized was that because I had these deep abandonment wounds, I was living in a very like fearful place where I became way too much of a people pleaser. The energy that I was bringing into my relationships was very overgiving, extending myself too much, taking on too much responsibility, to the point where I didn't know how to do anything different. I didn't know how to be a different kind of person in a relationship, and I lived in a lot of anxiety and fear, and I started to attract people into my life who kind of relied on me to be that person. They had their expectations that I would be that person. And of course, having said that, there were some people in my life who, although they said to me that they don't want me to be overgiving and overextended because of the kind of person I was being, they had that expectation. And so when I started to learn or try to be different, it created issues in that relationship. And so even at that point in my last friendship where I was doing that and it fell apart because of those issues, I started to think about myself, and I knew what I was doing. I knew the mistakes that I was making at that point. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to do any different. And then following on from that, I found myself in a new friendship where I literally, like, because I was more conscious to the way that patterns repeat and the way that cycles repeat, I could see things repeating. I could see patterns repeating, and I could see how the relationship kind of mirrored those similar traits from before. And yet I was trapping myself in that cycle of behaving in the same way, of overgiving, people pleasing. And what I realized was that even then I was overcommitting to things that didn't feel right, but the person didn't want me to overcommit anyways. They weren't having that expectation of me anyways. They were asking me, and the boundaries were a little bit loose. But if I had just been clear about my boundaries from the get-go, there would be no problems. And so it was a huge learning curve for me to realize, like, okay, this is continuing to repeat. And that's when I started to realize that, well, actually, if I can use these mistakes to utilize my own growth, they can be really powerful. Because the truth is, you're going to make mistakes as you grow. That's inevitable. You are a human being and you have learning curves. So it's inevitable that as you start to notice your patterns and as you start to try and evolve out of them, alongside that, you're going to have learning curves, and you're going to struggle with understanding how to navigate and shift out of those. You'll need support, you'll need guidance. Obviously, like I said, I do offer services that tap into exactly those things. But the point is that you're going to be in that transitional phase. But when you're in that transitional phase, it's how you use those mistakes to utilize you. That is the powerful key to getting you to where you want to be. So what I want to say is that in my podcast, I had spoken about spiritual relationships. And I don't know if I fully touched upon this, but obviously at one point in that episode, I did talk about how everything is a mirror. But what I want to really note here is that in your life, the things that you're experiencing in the outside 3D reality, what it mirrors back to you is never about other people. It's never about the outside situation. It's always saying something about you. These things that you're experiencing, in this case, obviously I'm talking about relationships, are mirrors, reflections of my beliefs and what I either struggle with or what I'm willing to accept. But the point I'm trying to make is that even though I didn't necessarily like learn from my mistakes, or it took me a while to understand my mistake in my previous friendships. No matter what, I was always being led to this moment where I started to understand how to have better boundaries with people, how to be more honest with people and say what I can and cannot give, and how to feel less fear if when I express those boundaries, they're not met well. Like, to know that it's okay. If someone doesn't respect me or respect my boundaries, that just means that they're not aligned with the kind of person I am, and therefore we don't mesh well. And that's fine. Some people have different expectations of friendships and relationships, and we all have those different expectations. And so it's about meeting people and finding people who are on the same level as you. And obviously that for me was a learning curve. What I realized is that even that last friendship or relationship that I had, in those moments I was going against my highest path. I wasn't listening to my intuition. Even though I knew what my intuition was saying, I was refusing to listen to it. I was like, no, it's fine. I'll do this, I'll do that. I don't want to lose this person, so I'll do everything. But at the end of the day, no matter what, I lost them. And it was inevitable. Even now in my heart, I know that it was inevitably leading up to that point. And probably for much longer than I even realized. And what it reflected back to me was the fact that God is always pushing you to a certain path. And this is what they talk about. So in Islam, we say it's al-qadr, which means in Christianity, it's predestination. Paganism calls it Akashic records. Hinduism calls it karma. There's a word for it in every faith or doctrine. There's a word for this thing. But the concept is the same. Again, signs and signifiers. Which is that no matter what you're doing, there is always a path that you are being led on. And when you make mistakes and you veer off that path, what is happening is in fact part of that purpose, because it's within those choices that you can then reflect and learn what you did to help you steer you on the correct path, the path that's meant for you, you know? And one of my favorite things is like, oh, well, if God is guiding us on the highest path, why do we have free will? My answer to that is that we are given the choice of free will to make whatever choices we make, but there is always a path that is the best path. The choices that are the best choices, the choices that feel the most aligned, that's your highest path. That's the path that God intended. That will get you to all those things, those desires that you have in your heart, which are naturally yours. Because you have those desires is proof that they're there for you, waiting for you in some quantum shift. But when you make these choices and you make these mistakes, that's enabling you to get to the path that is intended for you. What I realized for myself is that thinking about it now, I still got everything that was intended for me. I know that I'm on my path right now. I know that doing this and everything else that I've been doing is leading me to the places that I want to go. But probably, maybe, I will never know. But maybe if I had listened to my intuition and listened to God a lot sooner, I would have got those things in a better or much quicker way. But the point is that I got them regardless. Like, for example, it was March last year when I had, it was a download. It was a download, a spiritual revelation for me to do this podcast and release my website. It didn't come to me as just a random me thought. It was fed through me from God. In a moment of meditation. It was just like popped into my head, and I knew it was God speaking to me, and I was like, okay, this is divine. And all the ideas and all the concepts just started pouring out of me immediately, which I knew again was a sign that this was higher than me. This was my higher purpose. But it took me ages from the place where I had the idea to right now where I'm having had released it. And in that space I kept thinking, oh, well, if I should have released it sooner, and I was going through a lot at the time, and there was a lot of personal stuff that I was going through, which is the reason why I didn't release it at that point. But looking back at it now, I'm like, it happened in divine timing, because I learned so much in that period from when I said I was going to release it to actually releasing it, that massively helped and impacted my ability to get onto the camera and express what I wanted to express. So the point I'm trying to make is that everything that happens in stages. It's this thing that Neville Goddard talks about, which is the bridge of incidents. It's purposeful. It's the steps that are leading you to get you where you need to go. But the question you want to be asking yourself, whatever choice or whatever path you make, whether or not you do listen to your intuition or not, is what can I learn that can be valuable to me. And that's the key. And if you can do that, then no matter what mistakes you make along the way, it will never hinder you. And if you can have that faith and that trust that you're always going to be pushed on the right path, no matter which road you take, then you'll do it with a lot more confidence. You'll make the mistakes whilst being like, it's okay, I can make these and it will be fine. And to be honest, I'll leave it at this. In my opinion, the highest path is the path where you make the mistakes. The highest path is the path where you veer off with your own free will, where you're choosing and making your own choices. That's the path that is the path that will lead you to where you need to go, because that's where you learn how to evolve out of your patterns, out of your loops, out of your cycles. So if you can do a little bit of journaling and reflection after watching this video and think about, where have I in my life found situations that have hindered me, or choices that I've made that I didn't necessarily like? Why did I make those choices? What was going through my mind? Thinking about repeated situations and repeated patterns, and starting to notice what beliefs were tying me into this place. Why did I do that? If you can self-reflect on those things, that's your loop. That's your key. That's the keyhole for you to open the door to the next step. And it can be really powerful if you do that. So I just want it to be clear that, like, I'm in the process right now of doing the same thing, where I'm thinking about changing my behaviors, noticing my patterns, recognizing where I'm extending myself too much, where I'm giving away too much, where I'm not honoring my boundaries, and pausing, because to be honest, even at the moment, it's still really hard for me to say no. So I'm still really learning, and yeah, it's okay. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna mess up on the journey, but that's probably the best thing you can do. And it can be really, really powerful for you if you let it be. So don't worry. Check out my podcast, the Pixie Dust Podcast, if you want to go into any more detailed concepts about anything spiritual or to do with the mind. And find my website, moonlitpath.co.uk, if you want to work with me. Or follow my Instagram if you want to see my poetry and tap into evolving your own mind. And I wish you all the blessings and love and light, and I hope that you can learn from your mistakes, and I hope they fuel you. Stay blessed.